Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Thursday everybody. Weekend is almost upon us. I hope you're doing well. Let's jump in, and we'll start by touching on an ongoing development which we've been following for the last few months, the auditing compliance negotiations between United States and PRC officials and the future of Chinese American depository receipts on US capital markets. We remember in December of last year, the US Securities and Exchange Commission mandated, through a law passed by Congress in 2020, that Chinese companies listed on US stock exchanges must disclose whether they are owned or controlled by a government entity and provide evidence of their auditing inspections. Under the mandate, more than 200 companies, including major technology giants like Alibaba, could be kicked off US exchanges if they fail to comply. US sources speaking to US media expressed that Beijing realistically may only have a couple of weeks left to reach a deal with Washington that would enable US Public Company Accounting Oversight Board representatives to travel to China to start the inspections. We remember that this oversight board would need to complete China audit inspections by the 22nd of November this year to meet a US deadline that will require non-compliant Chinese companies to delist by early 2023. The Wall Street Journal reports that in recent closed-door meetings with Chinese companies and international investors, Chinese regulators said that they were working towards the goal of reaching a deal by the end of June. However, on Tuesday of this week, a US Securities and Exchange Commission official expressed that, quote, significant issues remain, end quote, in reaching a deal with China over this auditing compliance dispute. And, quote, even if an agreement is signed between the PCAOB and Chinese authorities, it will only be a first step, end quote. The same day, the China Securities Regulatory Commission, in a statement, sounded much more upbeat, expressing, we've always maintained that the audit inspection issue should be solved by cooperation on the basis of equality. Our attitude has always been positive and constructive. Yesterday, one Washington-based commentator expressed on these developments, quote, leaks from the PRC to Western journalists notwithstanding, a deal to prevent US-listed PRC firms from having to delist seems increasingly unlikely. It is politically very difficult for the US side to make any PRC-specific concessions, and it is politically very difficult for the PRC side to compromise too much on national security. The US has a ton of leverage right now. Losing access to the US markets would be a big blow to PRC firms and their executives, though American banks and exchanges would also be sad. So there is a chance the PRC caves. End quote. Next up, Taiwan. But quickly guys, if you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to hit the like button. And for anyone who wants to go the extra mile, my Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. As always, thank you everybody for the ongoing support and for your help keeping this channel going. In a largely unsurprising move in response to US President Biden's statements on Taiwan at his Monday meeting in Tokyo, Japan, the People's Liberation Army organized military drills near Taiwan over the following days. On Wednesday, yesterday, a spokesperson for China's Eastern Theater Command called the drills a, quote, solemn warning to the recent collusion between the United States and Taiwan, end quote, and went on to express, quote, it is hypocritical and futile for the United States to say one thing and do another on the Taiwan issue and frequently encourage and support Taiwan independence forces, end quote. State-run Global Times, in a piece the same day, also wrote, quote, not only the Taiwan independence forces, but also external interference forces like the US and Japan should realize by now that the People's Liberation Army has developed to a stage in which neither the armed forces on the island of Taiwan nor other countries' military forces, including the United States, can stop the People's Liberation Army from reunifying the island, end quote. And state-run Xinhua quoted China's foreign ministry, which expressed, quote, we treat our friends with fine wine, but for our enemies we have shotguns, end quote, citing lyrics from a theme song of a popular war film depicting the Korean War, the last conflict where the People's Republic of China and US soldiers were fighting each other. And last up, the Chinese economy, and things are looking worse by the day. In yet another sign of deep concern for the economy, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang yesterday chaired a special teleconference attended by likely over 100,000 cadres from across the country on stabilizing the economy. Premier Li expressed that, quote, "The difficulties in March and since April in particular are in some respects and to a certain extent greater than those experienced in 2020, end quote, here referring to the lockdowns after the Wuhan outbreak. It's also being reported from unofficial meeting minutes that Li expressed that Chinese growth risked falling out of a reasonable range, and if this happens, it would be very, very difficult and incredibly costly to return to that momentum. Reports on unofficial meeting minutes also claim that the Premier expressed, quote, "We will try to make sure the economy grows in the second quarter. This is not a high target and a far cry from our 5.5% goal, but we have to do so," end quote. The Premier also emphasized implementation of the 33 measures to stabilize the economy proposed at a recent State Council executive meeting, which we covered a few days ago, although, as we said back then too, the most disruptive economic headwind remains the zero COVID policy, which can lock down cities, and the risk of lockdown by itself is devastating to consumer and business confidence alike. The State Council is powerful, but the Politburo Standing Committee is more powerful, and it says that cadres must implement zero COVID. Indeed, we are seeing some friction between these two policy directives and the leadership behind them. Li also said that the State Council will send task forces to 12 provinces from Thursday, today, to oversee local work in implementing state policies. Soon after the meeting, Goldman Sachs economists wrote in a research note to investors, quote, "Chinese policymakers are in greater urgency to support the economy after the very weak activity growth in April, anemic recovery month to date in May, and continued increases in unemployment rates," end quote. Very unhelpfully, some key state media publications, including Economic Daily, today have published articles arguing that the economy is actually very healthy and that the present difficulties are primarily due to external factors. There should be no doubt at this point that we will definitely see massive and expensive stimulus this year from China. It is less clear how effective it will be at supporting the healthier parts of the economy, however. One official who attended the teleconference expressed to state media that one very high official, a provincial party secretary, had expressed that extraordinary measures would be used to save the economy. And the support measures keep rolling out by the day. Monday we covered the State Council measures. Tuesday it was the People's Bank of China's turn. And then yesterday, Wednesday, China's Finance Ministry rolled out multiple fiscal measures to, quote, "further help market players overcome difficulties and sustain development," end quote. On Wednesday too, the State Council also released guidelines saying that the healthy development of infrastructure real estate investment trusts, REITs, will be promoted and a multi-level infrastructure REITs market will be established. This is basically to get more capital pumped into the sectors from existing infrastructure. Now, let's finish this part on the economy with this observation made by finance professor at Peking University, Michael Pettis, just a few hours ago today. Quote, "Conversations in the past year from former students in business and finance suggest that many are also deeply worried about the outlook, not just for now, during the COVID-19 lockdown, but, more importantly, over what happens next. Is there a correct set of policy solutions that, once the lockdowns are behind us, will deliver sustainable growth of 4 to 5%? Probably not, contrary to what many may think. I don't think Beijing is prepared for the many years of very low growth that an adjustment requires. For the next few years, consequently, we may see a turbulent set of changing policies as China lurches confusedly between contradictory strategies," end quote.